recording.
Yep.
And Jane, are we ready? Okay, perfect. Good morning again, everyone. Time being 10 a.m., we will reconvene this meeting. We do have two public hearings. The first is a 10 a.m. first public hearing, 10 a.m. time certain first public hearing concerning amendment number 7 to ordinance number 41 in the matter of establishing ambulance service areas, setting application fees, assigning ambulance service providers, creating an emergency medical services advisory council, providing for administration and enforcement, and prescribing effective dates. And with us this morning again, we have Rachel Haggerty, Board of County Commissioners, Chief of Staff. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning again. As the current Emergency Medical Services Advisory Council Chair and Quality Improvement Coordinator that's established in this ordinance, I am elated to bring this amendment to you. It reflects over 2 years of work with the council, robust discussion, a lot of problem solving, and I think we've landed in a really good place. It's a very active, engaged body. Along the way, I think because of that robust discussion and problem solving, I think the relationships have strengthened, and that fosters the ability to provide robust emergency services throughout the county. So as with most ordinance amendments, we do a lot of cleanup as well that's needed, that we find over time for readability and clarity. So I'm not going to go over those. You'll see a lot of edits in the red marked version. I'll just highlight some of the substantive revisions that we went through. So on page 3, we removed references to application timelines. It was a little bit convoluted and wasn't really being adhered to. So as you'll see in the next provision, in the section 11, we are adding language that says that the county must execute a contract with the ASA provider. We do not have a contract, and we have never had a contract with Adventist Health or any other provider that we've had in the past for services. Everything just defaults to this. And so those timelines would be set forth in that agreement. Moving to, and stop me if I pass anything that you'd like me to comment on. On page 7, under penalties, this was one of our more robust discussions over the entire 2 years. There have been recommendations by some council members over time that we should be assessing penalties. We've had different discussions about whether we should be doing that. It ultimately would be the Board of Commissioners that would assess those penalties. At the end of the day, the council is recommending striking this section for a couple of reasons. The reality is we have an ASA provider. That is our one and only. And if this provision remains in this ordinance, it would be very unlikely that Adventist Health would sign on to a contract that assesses penalties. And then as we've been operating for the last couple of decades, there have been no penalties assessed. And so just for the reality of actually assessing penalties and what this means, we've decided to recommend striking penalties out of the ordinance. Moving on to page 16, section 5. You've heard a lot of discussion about response times and if our ASA provider is meeting response times. We've received several presentations, you've received them as well, and they are meeting response times. The current language that states response times for ASA providers shall not exceed 20 minutes on 90% of all the EMS calls within the boundaries of the plan remains. A lot of the conversation at this council revolved around how do you calculate that. And at the end of the day, I think there's finally some understanding of how that is calculated and that they are in fact meeting it. We did strike from this section in considering average response times, responses by QRTs, which is a quick response team, and fire departments rescue vehicles be included in the calculation. That is stricken because we do not have an agreement with them. This is for an ASA provider, so it is the ASA provider that needs to ultimately provide the response time, and they currently are well within the 20 minutes in those cases. So that has been stricken, but it does say that other EMS personnel should be adhering to it as a good practice. Under 5.2, a creative idea that came out of this troubleshooting conversation with the council was allowance for fire department personnel to operate ambulances, provided they meet certain driving requirements. And so Adventist Health is, maybe they have since I haven't been attending the council meetings anymore, but they have been negotiating an agreement with fire departments so they can, and this is a solution born out of trying to deal with our staffing issues. So that's an exciting option we now have. On page 19, section 5.7C, the council is defined. We are going from an 11 council membership to 9. And let's see, so we will have 2 representatives from the ASA, each ASA provider. Right now it is 1, so there will be 2 from Adventist Health. 3 from the Tillamook County Fire Agencies who are not directly employed by the ASA provider, and we don't have any that fit that. So there was interest to have all of the fire represented, but in doing so, we would have an issue with a quorum being present at the EMS Advisory Council, a quorum of the Fire Defense Board. So we talked through that with the fire departments and agencies and landed on 3. 1 representative from the Tillamook County Emergency Communications District, that's the director, that's a standing position. 1 supervising physician from each contracted ASA provider. That is pretty much the same language, but we've also added language for 1 fire services supervising physician nominated by the Fire Defense Board, because the supervising physician through Adventist Health was also serving the fire departments, and that needed to not be that way anymore. And Eric Swanson can explain more if you want more detail on that. But basically, that's why there's an additional supervising physician added to this council. And then in the past, the quality improvement coordinator has been me, as designated by the Board of Commissioners, and that's a position I inherited from former Chief of Staff Paul Vest. And after conversations with the council and trying to streamline where my skill set is and knowledge base, I recommended that the new emergency manager be the chair of this position, or of this council. So upon passage of this ordinance, I will effectively be stepping down. It's been a very interesting process. It's been valuable to learn how this part of our county works, but I think the council would be better served by having a chair who actually knows ambulance service areas. So that is the change in the council. And Randy has the last 2, maybe 3 meetings has been stepping in that role because it's happened that I've been unavailable for those meetings. So we were already transitioning. And then page 28 under section 7.2, response time. This, along with penalties, was another one of the big discussion points. This has a significant overhaul in language revisions. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. Again, pulling out that QRTs and fire departments are not part of the calculation for response times, not putting the onus on them. And then also recognizing that there are some times where it is just going to be impossible to get somewhere. If you're going to Browns Camp, you're not going to be there in 20 minutes. And so allowing that exception to not skew the 20 minutes. Interestingly, even with those times, they're still meeting it, but it does allow for that. So the new language reads, response times for emergency ambulance services shall be no greater than 20 minutes on 90% of all emergency calls, with exception for for calls that require the ambulance to respond into an off-road area. These areas include private land, the ocean shore, and forest lands owned by the state of Oregon, United States Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management. When an ambulance is required to stage, the staging time will be considered the arrival time for response time reporting purposes. Also out of the discussion with the council, the need for reporting this data regularly. So everybody could dive into these calls and everybody could be speaking to the public about what these response times are. We've had a provision for response time reporting, and so the ASA provider will be disseminating response time data monthly to the council, and I'm working on ways that that data is available, but generally they've been providing PowerPoint updates, but I think they're working on some technical ways to provide that as well. So that concludes what I was going to present for edits. After this is adopted, if you adopt it after the next hearing in 2 weeks, two things that do need to occur that the council will be working on. One is continuing to work, and they are currently working with Advanced Health on the contract for a provider. So you would ultimately be the ones approving and signing that after council review. We would, as I think a courtesy, give that to the council to review and see if there were any concerns. Additionally, the membership of the council should be adopted by board order. And so that would come to you, because there's nomination language in here by entities that would serve on this council. So that would be forthcoming as well. But all that would be coming to you from Randy. This is the last time you will see me present, well, after the next hearing on ASA. So any questions on the document before you open the public hearing?
Comments, questions?
I don't have any.
Although we really can't deliberate at this point until the next public hearing on this.
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank Rachel for 2 years of work on this, and I understand why you're elated to present it to us. I think that I have some little understanding of how hard you've worked on this, and I'm really very grateful. And beyond the updated document, you've helped the team grow and helped resolve conflict and helped us come together as one emergency service providing organization, where there was siloed and there was a lot of misunderstanding. And so I am amazed at the work that you've done, and I've heard from people in the community about how outstanding your chairmanship was. Your chairing skills, your facilitation skills were in that group, and how much difference that you personally made. So thank you. And I think that I looked over the agreement. I think it's great. I really support the changes. I support dropping the penalty, which some people wanted to use as a hammer and it didn't make sense. And I support the changing of the response times, because everybody knows, like you used the example of Browns Camp, that we are long county, rural, remote. There are lots of places that you cannot get to here in 20 minutes. And still, as you said, they very often manage to get there in 20 minutes somehow. But it's not, it's not realistic to hold people to the letter of a number of short minutes. So I think it's great, and I'm really grateful for your work. You're welcome.
Thank you, and I have not been super aware of this. I think it kicked off before my time, but I appreciate Commissioner Bell's comments, and Rachel, the good work that you do is very much appreciated, so thank you.
I would have to concur, Rachel. I mean, I was involved early on in this when there were concerns about the ambulance service agreement between all the parties. You have done just a miraculous job of threading that needle, if you were, and keeping everyone at the table and coming up with what I consider to be a terrific piece of work. Although we haven't, we need to continue this discussion at the next workshop. Bill, you had comments?
Yeah, one staff comment. The issue that Rachel mentioned personnel to do that. That was a result, at least in part, from the former Director of Public Works, Leanne Welch, getting involved and approaching me and Rachel to see if we could change that around. It doesn't mean that fire department personnel are gonna now start driving the ambulances from the scene to the hospital, although they could, I guess, if the circumstances necessitated it. It's more a matter of when they're on the scene, sometimes I guess the ambulance needs to move a little bit, and so sometimes it's just a practical matter. The fire guys need to, can fill in and get the ambulance moved around. So, anyway, that's just a little additional background on that one. It's really small piece that Rachel mentioned in the amendment to the new ASA.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that very much. Okay, so at this point, I think we're gonna open the public hearing, time being 10:16 a.m. We'll open this first public hearing to anyone that would like to make public comments, provide testimony to the board. Anyone online have any public comments? I'll ask one more time. We're opening the public comment portion of this public hearing for testimony pertaining to the ambulance service agreement with Tillamook County. Anyone have any public comments? Hearing none, time being 10:17 a.m., we will close the public hearing at this point for public comments. And I guess, Bill, we're done until our next public hearing on this issue, am I correct?
We're ready to roll, I think.
Okay, so we will close this first public hearing concerning the ambulance service agreement with Tillamook County. Time being 10:18 a.m. So we have a second public hearing, 10:15 a.m. time certain, and time being 10:18 a.m. We will open this second public hearing concerning declaring, so this is the second public hearing on today's agenda, but this is also the second public hearing on this topic. So we will open the second public hearing at 10:18 a.m. concerning declaring a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses in unincorporated Tillamook County. And we have added to this consideration of an ordinance in the matter of declaring a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses in unincorporated Tillamook County and declaring an emergency emergency referral to the electors. And we're going to turn this over to Bill Sargent, County Council.
Sound like a broken record. You guys know the background on this as well as I do. The voters approved in November 2020 a ballot measure which allowed the use of psilocybin as a treatment method, and it allows for what they term service centers and manufacturing businesses to produce and use psilocybin in controlled situations. The ordinance, the ballot measure, which has now been codified in this law, affords counties and cities the opportunity to opt out of the statute if you decide you want to refer an ordinance to the voters who would then decide yea or nay. The ordinance before you establishes that you are prepared to refer that to the voters, and if this is the ordinance that you land on, it would prohibit those businesses and the service centers in the unincorporated area of Tillamook County until December 31st, 2024. The rationale for this is set forth in the ordinance that the Oregon Health Authority is regulatory authority over this, and while they're apparently beginning tentatively to accept applications early next year, they haven't completed any rulemaking about how these businesses that it ought to at least be considered by the voters. Anecdotally, I know that across the street, the city is, I think, going to put this on the ballot as well. And oddly, maybe it's not oddly, but everybody in the county votes on this, not just the unincorporated areas, which maybe that's not surprising, it just sort of seems surprising to me. So, anyway, if you decide to go forward, Cassie's on, going to a conference, but I'm working with Christie, we've got to get it to the paper today, the ballot measure,
Okay.
which we're prepared.
Okay.
It'll be on the November 8th ballot if you decide you want to, move forward with this situation.
Okay, questions of staff?
So I guess clarification, when we spoke last time, there was a question of whether it needed to be a temporary ban, because we had language for a temporary ban and a permanent ban, and the language in the ballot measure indicated that it would end at the next voting general election. So there's a question of whether it needed to be temporary, and then you sent a response back, I believe, that said that as commissioners, we can end it at any time that we wish to, even if it is put in place by the voters. So can you just speak to that a little bit, the temporary versus permanent? And
Yeah, the board can end it by fiat, not fiat, but by.
I like being able to
Yeah,
end it by fiat.
yeah, we can. So if OHA got all their act together and you felt confident that, you could end it, you could. It'd be a politically kind of a strange situation for you to be put in, and, that you would, do something that the voters hadn't,
Yes.
had decided ought to occur.
Right.
So, that's kind of it. The funny part about it is I don't know Commissioner Scar, and I think this was part of the conversation I haven't really figured out, is whether at the end of this ordinance, they still haven't got it together. I think you could extend it or do a new one, refer it back out again.
it would be referred again. Whereas if we did a permanent ban, then it would be up to us to determine if and when we wanted to end it.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that's, when we get to deliberation, just part of our conversation is, are we confident in Oregon Health Authority's ability to get everything they need to done in the 2 years, given that it is up to us to end it at such time that we feel it is in the best interest of the county to begin to allow service centers and or growth centers. And what I'm hearing you say is if we put in a permanent ban, it would then be up to our discretion as to when we ended it. Whereas if we put in a temporary ban, if OHA isn't ready, it would have to be referred a second time to the voters. Is that correct?
Yes, I think you could do that.
Okay, so just kind of clarification between what is a temporary and what is a permanent.
Yeah, and incidentally, Ms. Olson, the district attorney, noticed a couple of things last hearing, and we did a little modification on not anything substantive, but some typographical errors that she picked up on. And I guess also anecdotally, as the commissioners are probably well aware, this psilocybin allowance ballot measure passed in Tacoma County. So, it'd be interesting ultimately to see what the voters have to say about this when it's kind of the second time around for everybody. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions of me.
So I was hoping that Aubrey would be here and we could bring her on as staff. I guess we can do that.
Sure.
But I do not see Aubrey Olson online. So any other questions of current staff?
So the prohibition, it says for certain businesses, and that's for the service centers where it would presumably be administered, and also manufacturers. So so manufacturers includes farms, grow operations.
Yeah, right. And as I recall, Commissioner Bill, these aren't outdoor grow ops, they're
Probably in greenhouses.
Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah,
Yeah.
confined and regulated as far as being somehow close to a school and things like that, so.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be, but we haven't seen
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
any rules and regs yet.
yeah, basically you're just saying, no, it's not gonna happen here until, the end of December next year.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, let's open the public hearing. Time being 10:26 a.m. We will open this public hearing for the second public hearing concerning declaring a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses in unincorporated Tillamook County. So with that, we'll ask for any public comment / testimony from anyone in the room or anyone online. Do we have anyone that would like to speak to this issue? I'll ask one more time. Do we have anyone that would like to provide public testimony, comment on the issue of the matter of a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses in unincorporated Tillamook County? Hearing none, we're going to close the public comment period of this second public hearing at 10:27 a.m. So with that, I think we go into deliberation. Bill, I have one question for you. At this point in time, if we move forward with this order, then people in the city of Tillamook, because I think this happened last night. I think the city of Tillamook voted to put this on the ballot in November. So basically, for the people that live within the confines of the city of Tillamook, they would be voting, they could vote twice on the county proposal if we were to do something, as well as the city proposal, even though they may be worded differently, correct?
Yes, and incidentally, they're not worded very differently.
Okay.
Just so you know,
Okay.
I used the city's ballot title
Okay.
liberally, which they got from the League of Oregon Cities,
Okay.
and there was an AOC model, but, they're gonna read virtually the same thing. One just says, until the city one says until December 31, 2024, you can't have the psilocybin businesses in the city limits of Tillamook. And the other one says you can't have it in the unincorporated areas of Tillamook. So anyway, yeah, they'll vote on both of them, I think.
Have you heard anything from any of the other cities or any of the other cities in Tillamook County taking this up?
No, I haven't.
So, that brings up another question. So, if indeed we put something on the ballot, and if indeed it were to pass the voters in November, the cities could basically do their own thing, because our county ordinance would not affect the incorporated cities. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, Commissioner Yamamoto. It applies only in the unincorporated areas. So Manzanita, Nehalem, they could have those
Okay.
within their city limits. If some entrepreneur, I guess, moved in there and wanted to open a business doing that in those communities, cities, actually.
When this idea first started floating around, we could take this to the voters. I wasn't hearing much of anything at all of counties and cities wanting to take this up, but there was a lot of momentum that started just a couple of months ago. And I think there are going to be quite a few ballot measures throughout the state, cities and counties on this issue.
I know, Commissioner Yamamoto, that Washington County is moving forward with it. I don't think the city of Beaverton just, just saw that in the chatter on AOC
Okay.
website.
Okay. Comment?
Well, we have talked about this before, as Mr. Sargent said, but I'm willing to go over it again. I am in support of this 2-year prohibition because we're not ready for it. We're not ready for the service centers. We're not ready for the licensed providers. None of those things are established yet. And I know that the state's working on them, but it's not ready yet. And additionally, I have serious concerns about preventing the rise of criminal activity around black market production and sale of this substance, which is illegal in other states. I believe Oregon is the only state that's passed a law of this kind. And I want to be clear that I support creative new treatments for depression. And depression is a very serious issue. PTSD is a very serious issue. And if indeed psilocybin microdoses can help people with depression and PTSD, I think we should be looking at that as a viable medical treatment. But what's happened with the legalization of marijuana is that it has created, and again, I'm not against that. I have a lot of friends who are recreational marijuana users. They use it responsibly, and that's fine. But what isn't fine is that in Oregon, we've created opportunity for criminal enterprises to thrive in black market marijuana growth and sales to states where it's illegal. And so we haven't solved that. We haven't solved it for marijuana, and I think that if we just go blindly into this, we can assume that the same sorts of things are going to happen, because people are always looking for opportunity, whether it's legal or illegal. People are always looking for opportunity, entrepreneurs. And so I want us to stop and say, hey, wait a second, we want to move forward responsibly, and we don't want to open ourselves up to the kinds of problems, the unintended consequences that happened with the legalization of marijuana. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, and thank you, Commissioner Bell. I think you've pretty well laid out what I share as concerns as well. We need to make sure that we are ready for this to happen in a responsible fashion before it starts happening in the bounds of our unincorporated county. So thank you for that very clear explanation.
We concur with both of the commissioners. We need to understand this is not marijuana. This is a hallucinogen. And without strict rules and regulations on how it's monitored, how it's grown, who prescribes it. I agree with Commissioner Bell, absolutely. There is a lot of talk going on that this can help depression, this can help our veterans, and we certainly don't want to squash anything that has true medicinal value. But those studies, I think, are also just continuing to be ongoing. But as it stands right now, Oregon OHA was supposed to have rules and regs in place by now, and they have not. They're 2 years late. I understand they're working on this feverishly, I hope. But until we see those rules and regs, I cannot support allowing psilocybin grows or prescribing in Tillamook County. And I'm hoping that's how the public feels, because we're not making this decision. I think we're allowing this to go to the ballot for the people of Tillamook County to really make their own decision. I know Bill mentioned that the residents of Tillamook County have already passed this once. I honestly don't believe that they really understood truly what was at stake here, especially with psilocybin. Marijuana is one thing, psilocybin and other hard drugs are another, although it was all kind of rolled into one big bill back in the day. So I also would want the citizens of Tillamook County to really look at this very carefully, because if this were just to be allowed in Tillamook County at this point with really no rules and regs, I think our children would be at risk. Just people in public would be at risk, not knowing exactly what this is. And and this is a very, to me, this is a very serious mind-altering drug. Again, which may have some medicinal purposes in the future. That's all being worked out as we speak. So I, for one, would agree that maybe we should put this on the ballot, let the people of Tillamook County really take another look at this and decide whether they want to allow this in Tillamook County at this point, or as our board order states, Ordinance 87, proposed Ordinance 87 states, just put a 2-year pause on this to allow OHA to come through and let's look at their regulations when they develop them, and we can take another look at this again in a couple of years. So I think I would agree with that. Any other comments or questions for staff before we take a vote or ask for a motion? Okay, so I guess I would be looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of an ordinance in the matter of declaring a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses in unincorporated Tillamook County and declaring an emergency. Referral to the electors.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, I think we've done some good work today. Appreciate that very much. We will close this second public hearing after that vote. Item number 23, so we will reconvene the board meeting at 10:37 a.m. and so we close the second public hearing also at 10:37 a.m. Item number 23 on our agenda, board concerns, non-agenda items. Item 24, board announcements. We have one board announcement. The commissioners will hold a board briefing on Wednesday, August 17, 2022 at 2 p.m. to discuss weekly commissioner updates. The meeting will be held at the courthouse in the Nehalem Room, 201 Laurel Avenue, Tillamook, Oregon. The teleconference number, if you would like to log on, is 971-254-3149. Conference ID 736-023-979#. With that, time being 10:38 a.m., we will adjourn this board meeting. Thank you, everyone.